Hi there, this is Ronnie, coming at you with a video. I never thought I would ever have to make this video. Or, moreover, I never thought I would have to make a video like this and have to consider the possibility that what I'm about to say would come across in any way as controversial. And yet, there's a very good possibility that some people seeing this video may consider it controversial. I was watching a video. There's a guy doing an unboxing of an RPG. And the RPG was essentially alternate history. Which it was alternate history, sort of end of sort of getting to the end of sort of post World War II. And the idea of the alternate history part was a world where the views on gender roles and race were more in line with how we feel now, or how we should feel now, and sort of saying, yeah, that's how we felt back then. That there was more equality. And one of the person in the comments went nuts on this, saying that it was perpetuating a lie that RPGs have been non-inclusive. Which, funnily enough, is not the case. RPGs have always been inclusive by inference. What we've seen more recently is, rather than RPGs being implicit in their inclusiveness, are RPGs being quite explicit in their inclusiveness. And I have no problem with that. There's the controversial part of this. I have no problem with RPGs having an explicit commentary, and I'll explain why. Two things have happened since RPGs really began in the 70s and 80s. Two things have happened. One, civil rights have moved on. Moved on. Nowhere near finished, but moved on. How women are viewed in society has definitely evolved from the 70s and 80s. Our views on ethnicity have definitely evolved. Globally evolved. Our views on sexuality has evolved. Our views on gender identity have evolved. Our views on religion have evolved. Our views on health, disabilities, both physical, emotional, mental health, we have evolved. We have grown. We have learned. We haven't reached the finish line in any of those yet, but we're certainly closer to it than we were back then. And I have no problem with role-playing games today acknowledging that evolution and incorporating that evolution into their games. None whatsoever. But the second reason is kind of my reaction to this other guy. Is I have seen at my friendly local gaming store, and to be fair, the proprietor of that gaming store has been very sharp on weeding these people out, and are men, and I say men, some of them in their 20s, some of them late teens, but guys, let's say that, guys who have a real problem with anyone at the table who is not a straight white male, because to them straight white male is the hobby. Someone who isn't straight, isn't white, isn't male is an anomaly and not one to be welcomed by these people. Now, I don't know whether it's an ideology they have picked up from whatever RPG they've read and taken and made an assumption, because as I say, for the vast majority of parts, RPGs even back in the day were implicitly inclusive. They didn't state it quite explicitly the way modern games are, but they were implicit. I know a couple of them have been a member of the Incel movement. I've done a video on that before. I quite happily stick two fingers up at the Incel movement, and I'm happy to do so again. Utterly stupid people. But that mentality is still there. It hasn't shifted. Now, I have been fortunate on my gaming table. From the very start when I started playing back in the mid-80s, up until the present day, I've always had an inclusive table. Not all of my players have been male. Not all of my players have been white. Not all of my players have been straight. But all of my players have been allowed at my table. The only prejudice that has ever existed on our table is if they're an arsehole or not. If they're an arsehole, then they don't get to stay on the table. But other than that, but I think a problem has occurred with some people, and maybe this is where this guy who was having a go was coming from. I think he made an assumption that because he has always had an inclusive table, that everyone else has had an inclusive table as well. And clearly that is not the case. Clearly, the fact that I have had an inclusive table doesn't mean everyone else has had. And my worry, is that there is a certain complacency. If we sort of all of us turn around, oh, but we've always been inclusive. And we allow this, at the moment, minority, hopefully not a minority, to seep further and further into our hobby. And I don't want that. Our hobby has, implicitly or explicitly, been inclusive and should remain so. But we shouldn't be blind to the fact that it is not wholly. It's not wholly inclusive. And we should applaud, however ham-fisted it's done. I mean, I've got Blue Rose. I've got first edition and second edition. I don't have the 5e version simply because I don't have 5e. But from what I've gathered, it's basically, if you want to run Blue Rose, if you want to play in the world of Aldous, the world, but you want to play, you want to use the 5e rules, then you can get this version, and it will do, and that's great, fine. And I admit that Blue Rose can be a little, mallet over the head when it comes to the explicit inclusion. But I'm glad they're at least kicking that conversation off. I love the fact that they're doing that. I love the fact that they're going so far as to say, we're doing it this way. I love that. I'm happy about that. I think that's great. And quite frankly, the hitting you over the head, you can take the notion of it and skim it. You can accept the premise and sort of deafen yourself to too much of the mallet. But I'm glad it's there. I'm glad other games are doing it. I don't mind explicit at all. I'm okay with it. And the reason I'm okay with it is very simple. It doesn't change anything about how I game. It doesn't change anything about the inclusivity of my table. But maybe someone who isn't inclusive might look at that and think, maybe I should be. And if it changes one person's mind for the better, I think that's a good thing. I think there's nothing wrong with a game being purely implicitly inclusive. But we're living in times where subtlety is kind of losing its grip, and sometimes people do need the bang over the head to remind them. So as I say, I do not believe this to be a controversial topic. I do not consider this to be a controversial thought and a controversial sort of stance by me, ideological stance. But I get it might be for other people. And that saddens me. because it really, the idea of our hobby not being inclusive, that the idea that our hobby should show, in some cases explicitly show, that we're inclusive. Is something I think needs to be addressed. I remember, this is going to sound like a tangent, but bear with me. I remember there was a lot of there was a big stink about police officers, members of our armed forces, who were LGBT, marching at pride parades in full uniform. And there were people saying, "Oh, why do they have to march in full uniform? Why do they have to do that? Are they you don't see plumbers marching in dungarees. And are they making a mockery of, is their purpose to be a mockery?" And the answer was no. There had been a perception of non-inclusivity by the police, by the armed forces to gay people. In case of the armed forces, it was legal. It was illegal to be openly gay in the armed forces for many years. And whilst that law has now changed and you can serve openly in the military, I think their reason for marching was to show that you can be both, that you can be a proud serving member of the police, of the emergency services, fireman, ambulance service, that you can be a proud member of our military and be gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. You can be those things. Sometimes to the public watching these parades, you have to be explicit and show that the police accept LGBT people too, that the armed forces accept LGBT people as well. You have to be explicit with that. Our hobby, our tabletop gaming, has for a long time, partially because of implicit inclusivity, has been assumed to be a straight white male hobby. And I've seen YouTube videos by members of the RPG community who believe that not only is it seen as a hobby, that it is a straight white male hobby, and that people who aren't straight, aren't white, aren't male shouldn't really be involved because it's our hobby. It's not for them. It's our hobby. To which I say utter bollocks, obviously, but that's what they say. But we face a similar problem to those that those people wanting to march at Pride face. In that, in order to show that we truly are inclusive, we have to be more explicit. This is why friendly local gaming stores are an absolute must. This is why I think friendly local gaming stores are key here. I think gaming groups are great, and I'm a member of one. I think they're great. But we need to open up our hobby and show that it's open. The sheer fact is, There's absolutely nothing with Lanarkshire Gamers that says you have to be a straight white male to be part of our group. But if you looked at the roster, if you looked at the members of our Facebook page, it's pretty much all straight white male. But we've had, gamers have come in who aren't male, who aren't white, who aren't straight. They've come in and there's been no cold shouldering, there's been no rebuttal, there's been nothing to say don't come here at all. It has been welcoming. It's been a warm welcome as well. It's not just, oh hi. It's been a warm welcome. We welcome everyone, and that's great. But that perception is there. And I think it's a perception that, like the Pride parades, the general public have a perception about the kind of people who play tabletop games. And I'm throwing the whole tabletop game here. I'm not just talking about RPGs, although I am going to put this in my RPG section. I'm talking about board games and card games and dice games and wargaming. I'm talking about all of it. I'm putting this in my RPG section simply because that's where this all kicked off from. But the friendly local gaming store has to be a key here. Settlers, which is in Hamilton, which is my FLGS, you get all kinds of people, all kinds of ages. I mean, I'm one of the old fuddy-duddies there. I'm possibly one of the oldest, if not the oldest, consistent person that goes there. I don't mind that. I'm seen as the old, you're the grandfather who has so much knowledge. But you see all these kids and they're passionate about their hobby. RPGs, yeah, sure, but also they're passionate. Mostly card games, I have to say, the big three with Magic and Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh. But there's such a diverse, so many different colours, so many, it's not just white people, it's not just men, there's so many women, and the reason I don't say transgender is because, as far as I'm concerned, if you are trans, then you are the gender you are transitioning to. And not everyone in that. In fact, there's a lot who would fall under the LGBT banner in that shop, but it's great to see the passion. It's great to see the hobby is growing. And maybe the old guard, sort of, I know there are, as I say, I've seen them on YouTube, people who are incredibly against the idea of straight white gamers being, that the hobby is opening up to more than straight white male gamers. But quite frankly, it always should have been. As I say, that goes back to implicit inclusivity that happened all the way through the hobby. But now people are making it explicit, and I don't have a problem with that, and I don't think anyone else should have a problem with that either. As I mentioned, Blue Rose is a good example. Blue Rose, the sort of main kingdom is an egalitarian kingdom. It's if you're a woman, you are, as far as the law is concerned, completely equal to a man. If you're trans, you're completely equal under the law. Want to marry someone of the opposite sex? Fine. You want to marry someone of the same sex? Fine. All equal. Doesn't mean there isn't prejudice around. Doesn't mean there aren't differences of opinion. But under the law of the land, everyone's equal. And I like that. I like that someone has said, let's do something different. My advice, if that's not the game for you, don't play it. If you don't want to play newer versions because you don't like the explicit nature of inclusivity sort of thrust in your face, that you are someone who's inclusive but you don't like to be banged over the head with it, don't play those games, or just ignore those paragraphs where it says it and just keep on being that inclusive person. But let's not hide our head in the sand. Let's not think that we still don't have a problem with racism in our hobby, because we do. That we don't have a problem with sexism in our hobby, because we do. That we still have a problem with homophobia and transphobia in our hobby. It is there. Thankfully, it's a minority. And maybe there is an argument to say maybe we ignore them all, they'll all go away. But I'm glad that as GMs, as people running tables, we who are inclusive, whether implicitly or explicitly, we who are inclusive, don't turn people away simply because they're not straight white males. But let's not shout down game companies who, out of good conscience actually, acknowledge the fact that there's still an issue and in their game attempt to address it. Do some of them maybe go over the top with it? Possibly. But then again, I would rather have that over the top than the over the top of something opposite, like Fatal. And sort of nasty games of that ilk, which really did play up the most horrendous sort of racism and sexism. So I want to see, what I would love to see is, as a hobby, as a whole, be it RPG or anything else, rather than feel that it's controversial for a company or a gaming store or an individual GM to turn around and say, yeah, I'm going to be more inclusive. Maybe I wasn't before, maybe I am now. But I want to see more and more us just saying, yeah, why shouldn't they say they're being inclusive? Why shouldn't they be inclusive? Let's do it. We've been doing it for years. I've been doing it for flipping decades. All the friends that I have, when I first started this hobby, I'm still friends with most of them now. We've always been inclusive. It's been very, I guess, implicit, but it's there. We've always been inclusive. we've always enjoyed it, and yeah. And maybe because we've always been inclusive, maybe when we see rule books and so on being very explicit about it, maybe we're like, you know, oh, of course, why do you need to say it? Of course we're inclusive. But unfortunately, there is still a perception that this hobby is not inclusive, that this hobby is not open. So I don't have a problem with books that challenge that view and state it explicitly that we are inclusive and we are open. I don't think anyone else should either. And I don't think that should be controversial. I really don't. It really shouldn't be. Not now. Not in this day and age. So those are my thoughts. Long ramble, but this has been these thoughts have been brewing for a while, and as I say, I'm treading some old ground, but it's really I just wanted to throw my thoughts on this. I doubt I will ever, unless something very silly happens, I doubt I'll ever touch this subject directly like this again. But I wanted to voice my opinions. Let me know yours, and I'll be back with another video.